If a fire starts in your neighbor's house, do you help put it out? Or do you lock your doors, stay silent, and hope it doesn't spread to your roof? This map shows global flashpoints in the 1930s. Red markers track where the sparks of conflict were already catching across Europe and the Pacific. Nations were deeply traumatized by the industrial-scale slaughter of the First World War. Then, the 1929 stock market crash triggered mass unemployment and poverty. The absolute last thing anyone wanted was another fight. Meanwhile, the Treaty of Versailles had severely punished Germany for that first war. Stripped of territory and forced to pay massive financial penalties, the country felt humiliated. This fostered deep public anger and a rising wave of revanchism, a powerful nationalistic desire for revenge that radical leaders eagerly exploited. Totalitarian regimes began leaning heavily into militarism. Adolf Hitler systematically ignored the strict limits placed on Germany by the peace treaties. He ordered factories to secretly, and then openly, churn out new weapons, airplanes, and tanks, and he reinstated the military draft. This diagram maps out how three distinct powers executed aggressive campaigns of imperialism. Hitler argued for Lebensraum, pushing eastward to conquer territory. Italy marched into Ethiopia to carve out an African empire, while Japan violently invaded Manchuria and China to seize control of East Asia. The international community had established the League of Nations to prevent exactly this, but the League had no military force of its own. It relied entirely on diplomacy. As these nations expanded, the world quickly learned that international rules without the threat of enforcement are merely suggestions. Lacking the appetite to enforce the rules, Britain and France adopted a policy of appeasement. The logic was simple. Make consecutive, targeted concessions to dictatorial powers, give them a piece of what they demand, and satisfy them enough to avoid a full-scale military conflict. The ultimate test of this policy came in September 1938 at the Munich Conference. Britain and France struck a deal. They would allow Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population, in exchange for his firm promise to seek no further territory. Notice who is missing from this room. No representative from Czechoslovakia was invited. 4 foreign leaders casually carved up a sovereign nation's borders without the host country present. Just a few months later, Hitler broke his promise and marched his army into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Seeing that the Allies would not fight back, the Axis powers formalized their military alliances. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain had returned from Munich promising peace for our time. But the diplomatic strategy had a fatal flaw. Giving a dictator what they want doesn't satisfy their appetite. It simply provides them with the resources for their next invasion. In August 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union stunned the international community by signing a non-aggression pact. Hidden inside this agreement was a secret protocol. The two totalitarian states had agreed to carve up Poland and divide the territory between themselves. On September 1, 1939, the German army shattered the Polish border barriers. Recognizing that appeasement had completely failed, Britain and France finally issued ultimata and declared war. But after the declaration, the fighting in the West barely started. This period became known as the Phony War, or Drôle de Guerre. The Allies launched no major land offensives for months. They clung to the hope that a naval blockade and severe economic pressure might slowly starve the German regime without requiring a massive, bloody confrontation. France decided to park its military behind the Maginot Line. This was an incredibly dense, heavily armed network of concrete bunkers, cannons, and physical obstacles along the German border. They believed it was impenetrable, choosing a purely defensive posture rather than attacking a distracted German army. While the Allies waited, Germany moved. Hitler secured crucial iron ore supply lines in Denmark and Norway, and then unleashed the Blitzkrieg. This lightning war utilized tight, high-speed coordination between dive bombers, mechanized tanks, and infantry. Germany rapidly bypassed the Maginot Line, conquering Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in a matter of weeks. By hiding behind static defenses and hoping the problem would solve itself, the Allies handed away the momentum. They allowed the Axis military to choose exactly where, when, and how the war in Western Europe would be fought. Those early, terrifyingly fast victories created an aura of invincibility around the Axis armies. But that extreme confidence quickly mutated into dangerous arrogance, leading both Germany and Japan to stretch their military capacities to the breaking point. In June 1941, driven by his core racial ideology, Hitler tore up his pact with the Soviets and launched Operation Barbarossa. He sent his army deep into the Soviet Union. The massive distances, Soviet scorched earth tactics, and the brutal freezing temperatures of the Russian winter brought the German advance to a grinding halt. On the other side of the planet, Japan executed a massive gamble. Seeking absolute control over the Pacific Ocean, they launched a surprise bombing raid on the U.S. naval fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Instead of securing their empire, the attack woke up the immense industrial capacity of the United States and pulled it directly into the war. The sheer scale of this overreach gave the Allies the openings they needed. American forces crippled the Japanese Navy at Midway. British troops secured North Africa at El Alamein. And at Stalingrad, the Soviet military managed to encircle and capture an entire German army in months of brutal, grinding urban combat. On June 6, 1944, the Allies cracked Fortress Europe. American, British, and Canadian troops stormed the beaches of Normandy during D-Day. This forced open a massive second front, trapping the German military between advancing armies in both the East and the West. The aggressive expansion of the Axis powers ultimately triggered their own destruction. By forcing a global conflict on multiple fronts, they compelled once divided nations to unite in a military and industrial coalition that they simply could not outlast. By the spring of 1945, Europe was physically broken. Hitler committed suicide as Soviet troops took Berlin. The victorious Allies divided a ruined Germany into 4 distinct occupation zones, laying the physical boundaries for the Cold War that would immediately follow. In the Pacific, the conflict concluded with the deployment of a terrifying new technology. The United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leaving ash and leveled wasteland in their wake to force Japan's final surrender. Even in liberated countries, the societal damage was profound. In Belgium, citizens carried out violent street repressions against neighbors who had collaborated with the Nazis. The nation nearly fractured into civil war over the royal question, bitterly debating whether King Leopold III, seen here, should be allowed to keep his throne after his early surrender.